"If he bites, it's on you," I told the rescue coordinator as I clipped the leash onto Bruno's collar, my hand already sweating despite the cool morning breeze. The woman, a middle-aged volunteer with a clipboard and a nervous smile, flinched a little, but nodded. "He's never shown aggression in the kennel," she said, "but we know his history. Be careful." Bruno, the 100-pound Rottweiler standing beside me, didn't move a muscle. His big, blocky head was lowered, and his deep brown eyes locked onto the small wire crate a few feet away. Inside that crate was the reason for everyone's unease. A 7-week-old mixed-breed puppy, barely larger than a football, whimpering softly. She had been dumped behind a diner in Iowa and picked up by a good Samaritan who couldn't keep her. The plan was simple. Foster both dogs, keep them separated, and introduce them slowly once Bruno had time to decompress from the shelter. But nothing ever goes according to plan when it comes to dogs, and especially not with one like Bruno. He had come from a backyard breeder turned hoarder case. Dozens of dogs in filth, chained or crammed into cages. When the authorities arrived, Bruno was guarding a rotting pile of food scraps like his life depended on it. He'd been bounced from shelter to shelter, none willing to keep a dog with such a record. I agreed to foster him because no one else would. Not because I was brave or naive, because I knew what it felt like to be unwanted. I had only lost my wife 9 months earlier. Cancer. The house felt like a grave ever since. Empty coffee mugs still sat on her side of the table. I hadn't cleared out her closet, and I didn't talk to the neighbors much anymore. My brother Mark said I needed a project. I figured maybe giving a dog like Bruno a chance would count. I didn't expect what happened next. The moment I opened the crate to take the puppy inside, Bruno surged forward. I barely caught the leash, my fingers burning. He let out a low, rumbling growl, not loud, not furious, but deep and raw. The puppy froze. Everyone watching tensed. "Stop," I said. Not to Bruno, to myself, to the whole scene. "Let me try something." I knelt, keeping a firm hold on the leash, and let the puppy crawl toward me. She sniffed the grass first, then inched forward, tail tucked tight between her legs. Her ears were floppy, and her little body shook with each hesitant step. Bruno watched her with eyes that seemed far older than his 5 years. I expected barking, snarling, a flash of teeth. Instead, he sat. Not just sat. He gently lowered himself to the grass, head still high, body relaxed. He didn't growl again. He didn't even flinch when the puppy, encouraged by his calm posture, toddled forward and bumped her nose against his paw. The rescue coordinator's clipboard clattered to the pavement. "I didn't think he'd do that," she said quietly. Neither did I. That moment changed everything. I named the puppy Daisy. Bruno and Daisy? They sounded like a mismatched cartoon duo, and maybe they were. He was massive, all muscle and broad shoulders, with a black and tan coat that gleamed in the sunlight. She was scruffy, a little caramel puffball with big dark eyes and oversized paws. Not a single guess on her breed stuck. Maybe lab, maybe shepherd, maybe half a dozen things. But from the moment they touched noses, Bruno didn't just tolerate Daisy. He became her shadow. Inside the house, Bruno would follow her from room to room. When she cried at night in her crate, he would lie down beside it until she fell asleep. He let her chew on his tail. He let her steal his food, once even backing away from his bowl entirely so she could nibble a piece of kibble that had bounced out. It wasn't instant peace and joy, of course. There were bumps. Potty training Daisy was a whole circus. Bruno still flinched at sudden noises, especially the sound of plastic bags or brooms. One night, when thunder rolled across the sky, he tried to wedge his entire body under my bed and got stuck halfway. But slowly, things shifted. It started small. I found myself laughing again. Not forced, not polite, real laughter. Like when Daisy tried to bark at a squirrel and ended up falling backward into a flower pot. Or when Bruno managed to balance 3 tennis balls in his mouth at once, looking entirely too proud of himself. I started cooking again. Just simple things at first. Grilled chicken, steamed rice. Something about watching the dogs sit politely at the edge of the kitchen made me want to do something with my hands. Something more than reheating frozen meals. I called Mark for the first time in months. "You were right," I said. "Bruno's good for me." "And the puppy?" "She's chaos," I said, smiling. "But I think he needs her too." Bruno had been so shut down when he arrived. Every time I touched him, he'd brace. Every time I raised my voice, even just in excitement, he'd cower. But when Daisy was around, it was like she gave him permission to let go. He'd chase her around the backyard, mouth open in a big, goofy grin. He started bringing me toys, licking my hand when I sat beside him, resting his chin on my knee while I worked. And Daisy? She grew fast. Too fast. In just a few weeks, she went from teetering steps to full-speed zoomies across the living room. She chewed through 4 slippers, 1 TV remote, and the corner of my old recliner. But no matter how chaotic she got, Bruno never snapped. Not once. One night, after I had cleaned up another puddle near the door, I sat down on the floor between them. Daisy curled up on my lap. Bruno leaned against my shoulder. The quiet buzz of the ceiling fan overhead was the only sound. "You two saved me," I said aloud. Maybe that sounded dramatic, but it felt true. Before they arrived, I hadn't felt anything but dullness, just existing. But Bruno and Daisy needed me. And somehow, needing someone again cracked something open inside me that I thought had died when my wife did. A few weeks in, the rescue called. "Hey, just checking in," the coordinator said. "How's it going with Bruno and Daisy?" "Good," I said. "Really good. We've had a few adoption inquiries come in for Bruno. He's been on the site a while." The words caught me off guard. Of course he was listed. That was the plan. I was fostering, not keeping. But when I looked over at Bruno, who was lying on the rug with Daisy sprawled across his back, I didn't feel ready to say goodbye. "Let me think about it," I said. That night, I sat outside with both dogs. The stars were out. Bruno had one paw resting over Daisy's belly like he was holding her in place. She snored softly. "You're not going anywhere," I told him. A week later, I called the rescue. "I want to adopt them," I said. "Both of them." The woman paused. "You're sure?" "Yeah," I said. "They belong here." And they did. Life didn't magically become perfect. There were more chewed remotes, a particularly awful incident involving Daisy, and a jar of peanut butter. Bruno developed an allergy to grain and had to be switched to a special diet that cost more than my own groceries. But every morning, I woke up with one dog snoring by my side and the other trying to climb onto the bed, and I felt like I could breathe again. People in the neighborhood noticed the change. "Haven't seen you smile in a long time," my mailman said one afternoon. "Got dogs now," I said simply. And everyone understood. Bruno and Daisy even became minor local celebrities. I'd take them to the dog park, and strangers would come up and say, "That's them, right? The big guy and the puppy? Saw the video the shelter posted." One woman even cried. She knelt down and hugged Bruno and said, "I had a Rottie just like him growing up. Thought I'd never see another one so gentle." Bruno just leaned into her, tail thumping. But I knew the truth. Bruno wasn't born gentle. He became that way. because someone gave him a chance, because Daisy brought out something buried under years of fear. And me? I became something else too. I wasn't just grieving, I was growing, not away from the love I had lost, but into something new, something I hadn't expected. Love doesn't disappear, it just changes shape. Sometimes it has fur and a wagging tail, and sometimes it arrives when you least expect it, in the form of a 100-pound Rottweiler who everyone thought was dangerous, and a tiny, scruffy puppy who refused to be afraid. This wasn't the end of our story. It was only the beginning. The trouble started with a squirrel. I'd seen plenty of backyard chases in my time, but nothing like the one that unfolded on a sleepy Tuesday morning while I was finishing my coffee. One moment, Bruno was sunbathing beside the tomato plants. The next, Daisy let out a high-pitched bark and tore across the yard like her fur was on fire. Bruno jolted upright, spotted the squirrel scrambling up the fence, and thundered after her without hesitation. He didn't stop at the fence line. He cleared it. All 100 pounds of Rottweiler muscle launched over the 4-foot barrier like it was nothing. I dropped my mug. The crash of ceramic on concrete didn't faze Daisy one bit. She was already trying to climb the same fence, scrabbling against the wood like a furry mountain goat. "Bruno!" I shouted. "Come!" Silence. Then a faint rustling from the other side. I sprinted around the block barefoot, heart pounding harder with every step. What if he'd chased that squirrel into traffic? What if someone saw him and assumed the worst, like so many others had before? But I didn't find chaos. I found Bruno standing calmly at the base of a large oak tree, tail wagging slowly, tongue lolling out. The squirrel, now safe on a high branch, chirped down at him with what I could only assume was rodent-level mockery. Bruno looked up, then sat down like he had all the time in the world. A boy on a bike had stopped nearby, maybe 12, with a mop of blonde hair and a mouth hanging half open. "That your dog?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, catching my breath. "Cool," he said, and then pedaled off like it was the most normal thing in the world. It wasn't, but I appreciated the lack of panic. I led Bruno home by the collar. Daisy was yipping at the gate when we got there, desperate to be in on the action. She pounced on Bruno as soon as he stepped inside like he was a returning war hero. That afternoon, I drove straight to Home Depot and bought 2 more feet of fence extension and a bundle of zip ties. If Bruno wanted to start flying, I'd have to get creative. But the fence jumping was just the start. Bruno, it turned out, was gaining confidence. With Daisy around, he wasn't just relaxed, he was energized, curious, eager to explore. I saw new sides of him every day. He started initiating play, not just with Daisy, but with other dogs at the park. He greeted neighbors with polite tail wags. He even tolerated the mailman with only a single chuff. Of course, the newfound energy had a price. One morning, I came downstairs to find that Daisy had figured out how to open the lower pantry door. A bag of flour had exploded across the kitchen floor. Bruno sat in the middle of it, dusted head to toe in white powder like a ghostly statue. Daisy, bless her tiny heart, was belly up in a pile of spilled oatmeal. It took 2 hours and 4 vacuum bags to clean up. But I couldn't even be mad. They looked too pleased with themselves. Still, I started to wonder if they needed more stimulation, something beyond chew toys and backyard chases, something structured. Mark had mentioned a dog trainer he'd used for his own lab mix. A woman named Christine, who ran a canine enrichment class out of her farm just outside town. "She works miracles," he'd said, "and she's good with the tough cases." I gave her a call. "2 dogs?" she asked. "1 Rottie, 1 puppy." "Yes." "Bring them Saturday? And bring chicken, real chicken, not that dehydrated junk." Her place was a slice of pastoral heaven. Rolling hills, a red barn, a fenced-in agility course, and a long porch where dogs lounged in the sun like royalty. Christine was in her 50s, wearing jeans, boots, and a ball cap that said "Woof" in big white letters. She took one look at Bruno and said, "Big boy, how's he with commands?" "Good," I said. "Mostly." "And the little one?" "She's a tornado in a fur coat." Christine laughed. "Perfect. Let's see what they've got." What followed was 3 hours of sweat, laughter, and chicken-scented bribery. Christine guided us through everything from basic obedience to obstacle navigation. Daisy tried to chew every tunnel we walked through. Bruno balked at the seesaw, but eventually crossed it with a tentative trot. The moment that stuck with me, though, happened during the recall exercise. Christine had me kneel on one end of the field, while another trainer held Bruno on the far side. "Call him like you mean it," she said. I opened my arms and shouted, "Bruno, come!" He bolted toward me like a freight train, paws pounding, tongue flapping. Halfway there, he stopped, looked back. Daisy was still at the far end, wriggling in place. Bruno turned, trotted back to her, nudged her forward, and only then ran to me, both dogs galloping side by side. Christine chuckled. "Now that's loyalty." I thought about that all week. Training became our new ritual. Saturday mornings at the farm, weekdays practicing at home. Daisy learned sit, down, and roll over. Bruno mastered stay, heel, and even a few tricks. He had a surprisingly gentle high five. One afternoon, Christine pulled me aside. "Have you thought about therapy work?" "With Bruno?" "Yes. He's steady, observant, and he's bonded beautifully with that pup. I think they'd make a great team." The idea seemed far-fetched. A few months ago, Bruno had been a fearful wreck. Now someone thought he might comfort others? But I couldn't deny the change. Bruno was thriving, and Daisy's boundless energy was matched by a kind of joyful curiosity that made everyone around her smile. We started the certification process. Christine helped us get assessed by a local evaluator, and after a few sessions of supervised visits to a senior living home, the coordinator there pulled me aside. "I want them to come back," she said. "Especially the big one. Mr. Wallace hasn't spoken to anyone in weeks, but he talked to Bruno. Said the dog reminded him of one he had as a boy." Bruno sat by the man's wheelchair like a statue, letting him stroke his head with trembling fingers. Daisy, of course, was bouncing from person to person like an untrained balloon. But even she had her moments. One woman with late-stage dementia smiled for the first time in days when Daisy licked her fingers. Afterward, I sat in the car with both dogs passed out in the back seat. "I think we found your purpose," I whispered. Not just for them. For me, too. The visits became weekly. We rotated between the senior home, a children's reading center, and even a rehabilitation clinic where Bruno was particularly popular with stroke patients. People always asked, "How did you train him to be so calm?" I never had a perfect answer. It wasn't training. It was trust. Rebuilt slowly, through patience and presence. And maybe, in large part, because of Daisy. Their bond was something I couldn't explain. Daisy annoyed Bruno endlessly. She stole his bones. She barked in his ear when he slept. She tried to ride on his back like a horse. And yet, wherever she went, he followed. If she wandered too far at the park, he herded her back. If she whimpered in her crate, he pawed at the door until I opened it. One stormy night, the power went out. Thunder rolled like a freight train. Daisy crawled under the couch and refused to come out. Bruno didn't panic. He simply lay down beside the couch, stretched one massive paw under the frame until it touched her side, and stayed there until the storm passed. When the lights came back on, they both emerged. Bruno blinking sleepily, Daisy chewing his ear. I watched them and felt a swell of something I hadn't recognized in a long time. Peace. Not the kind that comes from silence. The kind that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Then one day, a letter arrived. It was from the rescue. "You were selected as the subject of our annual donor spotlight," it said. "We'd love to share your story, yours, Bruno's, and Daisy's." At first, I hesitated. I didn't want attention. But then I thought about the dogs still sitting in shelters, waiting. Maybe someone would read it. Maybe they'd take a chance. So I wrote it. Everything. The fence, the flower, the field, the storm. And I ended it with this line. They weren't the dogs I expected, but they became the family I needed. A week after the story went live, my phone buzzed with messages. "Saw your article. Cried reading it. You inspired us. We're fostering now." One message, though, stuck out. It was from a woman named Emma. "I run the library reading program in town. Would you bring the dogs? We'd love to have them." I replied yes before I even finished reading, and that weekend I found myself in a circle of giggling children while Daisy chased after foam alphabet blocks, and Bruno laid his head in a little girl's lap as she stumbled through her first book. He didn't move once, just listened. And I knew there was still so much more ahead for us, because some stories don't end. They just keep growing. It didn't hit me all at once. It crept in, quiet and slow, like the way a room cools down at night. You only notice the change when you suddenly reach for a sweater. That's what it felt like the morning I caught myself humming. I was washing dishes. Bruno lay by the back door with his head resting on his front paws, watching birds hop along the fence. Daisy snored on the kitchen rug, belly up, legs twitching in a dream. Outside, the wind rustled the leaves just enough to make the wind chimes clink. I don't even know what tune I was humming. Something my wife used to play on the piano, maybe. It just slipped out. I paused, sponge in hand, and listened to the quiet house. Then I glanced at the dogs. They were home. This was home. Somehow, without realizing it, we'd stitched ourselves into a routine that fit better than anything I'd planned. The dogs had calendars now. Not literally, but close. Monday, park. Tuesday, reading group. Wednesday, rest. Thursday, visit to the senior home. Friday, training check-in. Saturday, therapy at the rehab center. Sunday, slow day with a long hike. We kept to it. It grounded us. The routine wasn't rigid. It was something to look forward to. Something that made the house feel alive. One Thursday, at the senior home, Bruno walked straight to Mr. Wallace without prompting. The old man was seated under a window, slumped forward slightly, his hands resting on his knees. He didn't speak much, usually. But that day, as Bruno sat in front of him and nudged his hand gently with his nose, Mr. Wallace smiled and whispered, "Hey there, buddy. Brought the little rascal too?" Daisy was too busy climbing into someone else's lap to hear him. I watched the interaction from a few feet away. No one else noticed. It wasn't dramatic, just a small shift. But that was how healing worked, I was learning, in these tiny, unnoticed turns toward the light. Later that afternoon, back home, I received a call from the town's community center. "We're holding a kids' summer camp," the woman said. "We saw your dogs in the library newsletter. Would you be willing to visit during our animal week?" "Of course," I said. "Just a heads up," she added. "Some of these kids are going through tough stuff. One boy just entered foster care, others have behavioral challenges. We try to make the week feel safe." "We'll be gentle," I promised. That next Wednesday, I walked into the community center gym with Bruno on one side and Daisy on the other. The noise was immediate: laughter, shouting, sneakers squeaking on the floor. A group of about 30 kids sat in a circle on foam mats. As soon as we entered, Daisy pranced ahead and flopped down dramatically in front of a red-headed boy with freckles. He let out a surprised laugh. Bruno, ever calm, waited for my cue. When I nodded, he approached the group slowly and lay down beside a girl with dark pigtails and a Spider-Man t-shirt. The room hushed. It was like magic. I introduced the dogs, told the kids a little about their story, how Bruno had once been scared of everything, how Daisy had been abandoned as a baby, how they'd helped each other grow. A boy in the back raised his hand. "Did they fight when they first met?" "No," I said. Bruno sat down, and Daisy sniffed his paw. That was it. Another child asked if Daisy ever shut up. That got a big laugh. We stayed for nearly an hour. One boy, Jacob, didn't speak at all. He just watched. When it was time to go, I noticed him sitting apart from the group, arms wrapped around his knees. Bruno noticed too. He walked over slowly, stood beside the boy, then lowered himself down and rested his chin on the kid's shoe. Jacob didn't move, didn't look up. Then, without a word, he reached out and placed his hand on Bruno's head. We came back the next day. That time, Jacob spoke. He said Daisy reminded him of his old dog, Pepper. He told me his parents were getting divorced, and that he didn't like loud places anymore. He asked if dogs could get sad. "Sure," I said. "But they get better when they're loved." "I think I'm like that," he said. That night, after the visit, I stayed up late looking at photos of Daisy when she first arrived. Her eyes had been wary, her ribs visible. Bruno had been gaunt too, his posture defensive. Now they both looked strong, settled, whole. A few days later, Christine called. "How would you feel about entering Bruno in the State Therapy Dog Showcase?" "Showcase? It's not a competition," she clarified. "More like a celebration. Dogs who've made an impact get recognized. There's a short presentation. You share your story. You'd be great." The idea of standing in front of a crowd didn't thrill me, but something about the way she said celebration stuck with me. "Let's do it," I said. It was held in the town center auditorium. About 20 dogs were recognized, each introduced with a brief story. There were golden retrievers, labs, a sheltie, even a one-eyed mutt named Cricket, who'd comforted burn victims. Then it was Bruno's turn. I walked on stage with Daisy under one arm and Bruno at my side. He sat quietly while I told the audience about the first time he met Daisy, about the flower incident, about therapy visits, about Jacob. I didn't read from a script. I just talked. At one point I said, "He came to me broken. I thought I'd be fixing him, but it turns out he was fixing me." A few people wiped their eyes. Daisy yawned dramatically. Bruno leaned against my leg. Afterward, a couple came up to me and said they'd been afraid to adopt a large dog. "But your story changed our minds. We're heading to the shelter this weekend." Another man, older, said his son had PTSD and asked if Bruno had ever worked with veterans. "Not yet," I said, "but maybe someday." That night, I gave the dogs extra chicken. Daisy licked the plate clean. Bruno sat by the sliding door, watching the yard, tail swishing slowly. He seemed proud. I sat beside him and scratched behind his ears. "You're a good boy," I whispered. He leaned into my hand. The following week brought a surprise. A letter in the mail from a woman named Sarah who ran a farm sanctuary an hour out of town. "We work with kids and teens in foster care," she wrote. "Many of them have suffered abuse or neglect. We use animals to help them rebuild trust. Someone forwarded us your article. Would you consider visiting?" I didn't hesitate. We drove out on a cloudy Tuesday morning. The sanctuary was sprawling and quiet, with rolling fields, grazing goats, and a few horses standing near the fences. A Great Pyrenees greeted us at the gate. Sarah met us by the barn. She had kind eyes, a gentle way of speaking. "We have a group of 16s today," she said. "Some are skeptical, some are just quiet, but I think your dogs might help." We spent 2 hours in the circle of hay bales. Daisy made everyone laugh within minutes. She ran headfirst into a bucket, then tried to sit in a teenager's lap and accidentally knocked his hat off. Bruno stayed close to me at first, but then one boy, tall and silent, started petting his back. Another rested her hand on his side. Slowly, the circle loosened. People started talking. One girl whispered, "I don't trust people much, but dogs don't lie." Another said, "He looks scary, but he's not, like me." When we left, Sarah hugged me. "They did more in 2 hours than some counselors manage in weeks," she said. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and promised we'd come again. On the way home, I rolled down the window. Daisy stuck her nose out, ears flapping. Bruno looked at her, then at me, then rested his head on the console. It struck me again. How far we'd come. How much we'd changed. Not just Bruno. Not just Daisy. Me. There were still moments of ache. I'd walk past the piano and expect to hear her playing. I'd wake up from dreams of old vacations, reach for the other side of the bed, and find it empty. But those moments didn't undo the joy. They didn't drown it. They just sat beside it. And maybe that was okay. That night, I got a message from Jacob's camp counselor. He asked if he could volunteer with dogs someday. Said he wants to be like Bruno. I sat in the dark for a long time, holding my phone. Somehow, this big, misunderstood dog had become someone's role model. I looked over at him, sleeping on his side, one paw draped over Daisy. We weren't finished yet. Not even close. The first snowfall came earlier than expected. I woke up to a white blur outside the window and the soft sound of paws pacing on the hardwood floor. Daisy was already at the back door, nose pressed to the glass, tail swishing wildly. Bruno stood behind her, more reserved, but ears perked. When I opened the door, Daisy launched into the yard like a rocket. She plowed face first into the snowbank by the porch, popped up covered in flakes, and did it again. Bruno followed at a slower pace, nose down, snuffling through the snow like he was inspecting every inch of it. By the time I'd brewed coffee, the backyard looked like a battlefield. Snow piled high where Daisy had dug holes, little trails zigzagging from one corner to another. Bruno stood in the middle of it, letting flakes settle on his back. Later that morning, we went for a walk around the block. Bruno walked easily on the leash, as always. Daisy bounced along beside him, slipping once or twice on the icy patches but regaining her footing quickly. Neighbors waved. Some stopped to pet the dogs. One woman leaned out her front door to shout, "They look like they're in a Christmas movie." In a way, it did feel magical. Not just the snow, but the sense that the dogs belonged here. Part of the neighborhood, part of the season, part of my life. Something about seeing their tracks beside mine in the snow made it all feel permanent. That weekend, the community center asked if we could help with their winter event. Nothing huge, just a table set up with some animal therapy activities, a chance for kids to meet the dogs, maybe take photos. I said yes, of course. The event was held in the local elementary school gym, decorated with paper snowflakes and strings of white lights. A fake fireplace had been set up near the corner, and someone handed me a red scarf to tie around Bruno's neck. Daisy got a tiny set of reindeer antlers, which she immediately tried to chew off. Kids lined up to take pictures with them. Parents asked questions. Volunteers handed out hot cocoa. It should have felt hectic, but it didn't. It felt warm, like being wrapped in a quilt that smelled faintly of cinnamon and pine. One girl, maybe 7 or 8, sat down beside Bruno and didn't say a word. Just leaned against him and closed her eyes. "She's been having a hard year," her father said softly. "Lost her mom in the spring. Won't talk about it. But she lit up when she saw your dogs." Bruno didn't move, just stayed pressed to her side, solid and calm. Daisy, meanwhile, had discovered the snack table and was being gently pried away from a tray of sugar cookies. As we packed up that evening, a teacher approached me. "You're the one who wrote the article, right? About adopting the Rottweiler and the puppy?" "That's me." "Well," she said, "you've got fans at my school. Some of the kids read it in class. We used it to talk about empathy, about second chances." That caught me off guard. I'd written the article because the rescue asked. I didn't think it would ripple this far. She continued, "If you ever want to come speak, just a little presentation, maybe read to the younger grades, I think they'd love it." I agreed without hesitation. So the following week, Bruno and Daisy made their elementary school debut. I stood in front of a classroom full of wide-eyed first graders, reading a short book about kindness and animals. Daisy sat curled at my feet, tail thumping every time I said her name. Bruno lay at the front of the room, half dozing. During the Q&A, a boy raised his hand and asked, "Do they know they're famous?" "I don't think so," I said. "They just know they're loved." The boy nodded like that was an even better answer. As winter deepened, our calendar filled up. The dogs made their usual rounds: library, rehab center, senior home. Sarah from the farm sanctuary called to ask if we'd help with their holiday open house. And Christine invited us to her annual year-end gathering for therapy dog handlers. "Nothing formal," she said. "Just a potluck, some treats for the dogs, a chance to share stories." We went. The gathering was held in her barn, which had been decorated with strings of soft yellow lights and garlands made of pine cones and red ribbon. Dogs of all shapes and sizes trotted around, wearing little sweaters or bow ties. There was a moment during the meal when someone asked each of us to share what our dogs had taught us this year. When it was my turn, I looked down at Bruno, who had just let a stranger's toddler climb over his back without complaint, and at Daisy, who was sneaking licks from an unattended dessert plate. "They taught me that healing isn't loud," I said. "It's quiet. It's in the little things. A tail wag, a soft nudge, a moment of stillness. They taught me that you can come from broken places and still build something beautiful." There was a pause, then a few nods. A woman across the room wiped her eyes. When the party ended, Christine walked us to the car. "You've come a long way," she said. "We all have. Have you ever thought about mentoring? We have a few new volunteers who could use guidance, especially the ones working with more challenging dogs." I agreed on the spot. It felt right, like the next natural step. A few days later, I met with one of the new volunteers. His name was Ryan, a quiet college kid with thick glasses and a nervous laugh. He'd just started working with a rescue named Max, a skittish German shepherd who wouldn't make eye contact. "He won't even take treats from my hand," Ryan said. "I don't think he likes me." "Give it time," I told him. "Bruno used to flinch when I opened a cabinet. Now he lets Daisy sleep on his face." Ryan laughed. "That's what hope looks like, I guess." We kept in touch. I offered tips, brought Bruno and Daisy along during one of his sessions. It helped. Slowly, Max started inching closer. One day, he licked Ryan's hand. I celebrated like it was a touchdown. One cold morning, while we were walking through the park, I spotted something that made me stop in my tracks. A woman stood under a tree, struggling to manage a leash in each hand. A small tan dog pulled in one direction. A lanky brindle mutt jumped at snowflakes in the air. It looked familiar, too familiar. As we approached, the woman turned. "You're Bruno's guy, right?" "I am." "We adopted these two after reading your article," she said. "From the same rescue. We weren't planning on two, but they came as a set?" "More like the second one climbed into the car before we could stop him." We laughed. I knelt to greet the dogs. Both wiggled with excitement. One licked my hand. The other rolled onto his back immediately. "They're good together," I said. "They're teaching us more than we're teaching them," she replied. Back at home, I watched Bruno and Daisy curled up by the fire and felt something shift in my chest. Not pain, not longing, something else, something warmer. The house had changed. There were toys scattered in corners, a paw print on the hallway wall, a dog bed in nearly every room. The quiet that had once haunted the space was gone. One night, I pulled out the old photo albums, not the digital ones, the real kind, with plastic pages and handwritten labels. I flipped through them slowly. Vacations, birthdays, quiet mornings on the porch, her smile in every frame. I didn't cry. "Not this time," I smiled back. Then I slipped in a new photo, one I'd taken last week at the farm sanctuary. Bruno, sitting tall. Daisy, nose in the air, both of them side by side, the winter sun lighting up their fur. I tucked it in the last page. Not to replace anything, but to keep building the story. Bruno barked, just once. But it was enough to pull me out of the dream I'd been sinking into. One of those murky half-sleeps where the line between memory and reality blurs. I sat up fast, heart pounding. It was still dark outside. I turned toward the sound. Bruno stood by the bedroom door, alert but not panicked, head cocked to the side. Daisy peeked out from under the bed, her tail wagging cautiously. I listened. The house was quiet. No footsteps. No rattling windows. Then I heard it. Soft scratching. Not inside, outside, near the front porch. I got up, careful not to startle them, and made my way to the front of the house. Bruno followed, silent but watchful. I peered through the peephole, saw nothing, then opened the door just a crack. There, in the cold, pre-dawn dark, was a dog. Skinny, wet, covered in snow. His fur was short, a pale brown with muddy streaks. He looked young, but not a puppy, maybe 8 or 9 months. No collar, no tag. Just wide, fearful eyes and a rib cage you could count from 10 feet away. He took a shaky step back when I opened the door fully. Bruno didn't growl, didn't even move, just sat beside me like a sentinel. I crouched down and held out my hand. "Hey, buddy. Where'd you come from?" The dog hesitated, then crept forward. He sniffed my hand, then sat down and stared up at me, like he was asking a question I didn't yet understand. I brought him inside. Daisy ran circles around him, tail wagging like she'd just won a prize. Bruno gave him one long sniff, and then walked off to the water bowl, as if to say, "Fine by me." I dried him off, fed him, then set up a blanket near the fireplace. He curled into a ball and fell asleep in seconds. The next morning I called the local shelters. No one had reported him missing. I posted on neighborhood pages, contacted animal control, even checked for a microchip. Nothing. Days passed. No one came forward. And the dog, whom I started calling Cooper, fit in like he'd been here forever. He was different from Bruno and Daisy. More reserved, slower to trust. He'd flinch at sudden movements and duck when I raised my voice even a little, but he watched the other two constantly. When Daisy jumped into my lap, Cooper would inch closer. When Bruno rested his chin on my knee, Cooper would mirror him from a distance. It was like he was studying happiness in real time. One night, I sat by the fire, all three dogs snoozing around me, and thought about how it started with just Bruno. One dog, one chance. And now here we were. I wasn't sure if I could keep him. 3 dogs were a lot. More mouths to feed, more fur, more vet visits. But as the week went on, something kept tugging at me. Maybe it was the way Cooper followed Bruno like a shadow. Maybe it was the way he'd finally wagged his tail, just once, when Daisy licked his face. Or maybe it was the way he sighed in his sleep, like he'd finally exhaled after holding his breath for a lifetime. I called Mark. "You're going to say I'm crazy," I said. "You're keeping him, aren't you?" "I think I have to." "Then do it, crazy or not. You're good at this." I called the vet and made an appointment. Cooper wasn't in great shape. He had a few old scars, some mild malnutrition, and a limp in his back right leg that the vet guessed was from an untreated sprain. But he was young. Recoverable. I paid the bill, brought him home, and officially added a 3rd bowl to the kitchen floor. We adjusted. Slowly. Cooper didn't have Bruno's steadiness or Daisy's mischief. He was quiet, observant, often curled up in corners, watching the world. But over time, he began to soften. He started following Daisy into the backyard, started bringing me the plush squirrel toy that no one had touched in weeks. He even barked once, at the vacuum. It was progress. I updated Christine. 3 now?" she said, laughing. "You're building a pack." "I guess so." "Bring him to class. Let's see what he's got." Training Cooper was different. He was hesitant, unsure. He didn't like loud noises or sudden movements, but he watched Bruno. He copied him. Christine noticed. "You've got something rare here," she said. "That's a dog learning how to be a dog." Bruno became his unofficial tutor. When I gave commands, Cooper would wait, then follow after Bruno. When Daisy bounded ahead, Cooper would trot behind. When we walked through the park, Bruno on one side and Cooper on the other, people often asked if they were related. Not by blood, I'd say, but maybe by choice. A few weeks later, I was asked to speak at a high school assembly for their kindness initiative. It wasn't something I would have volunteered for, but one of the teachers knew me from the community center. "Just talk about second chances," she said, "about what animals can teach us." I brought all 3 dogs. Bruno sat at my side, noble and calm. Daisy trotted in circles and tried to climb the auditorium steps. And Cooper, surprisingly, stayed close, pressed to my leg. His eyes alert, but not afraid. I talked about the first night I brought Bruno home, about finding Daisy, about the rescue, the therapy visits, the senior center, Jacob, the sanctuary, the school. Then I told them about Cooper, about waking up to a bark in the dark, about the quiet question in his eyes. He didn't ask for much, I said. Just a chance. When the students left the auditorium, one boy stayed behind. He approached slowly. "I don't like talking to people much," he said. "But dogs? Dogs don't judge." He knelt down. Bruno nudged his hand. Cooper leaned forward cautiously. The boy smiled. "I wish I could help dogs like you do." "You can," I said. "Start small. Visit a shelter. Volunteer. They need people who understand quiet." He nodded and walked away with a sense of purpose I hadn't expected. A few days later, I received an email from the high school counselor. The boy had signed up to volunteer at the local Humane Society. "He told me he finally feels like he has something to offer," she wrote. At home, I sat on the couch with all 3 dogs sprawled around me and let the quiet settle. It wasn't the same quiet that used to haunt me. This one was warm. Alive. Then Daisy farted so loud she woke herself up. Cooper jumped. Bruno rolled his eyes, if dogs could do that. I laughed until I cried. Spring crept in slowly. The snow melted. Grass peeked through. The days stretched longer. The sun stronger. With the thaw came new calls. More invitations. More chances to bring the dogs to places that needed them. The farm sanctuary asked us back for a spring open house. The rehab center added us to their rotating schedule. A local library requested a monthly reading session. We made it work. Bruno remained the anchor. Daisy was the spark. And Cooper, quiet but steady, became the heart of it all. He had a way of sitting beside people. Not pressing, not pawing, just being there. And people responded to that. One afternoon, at the rehab center, a woman recovering from surgery reached for his head and whispered, "You know what it's like to hurt, don't you?" Cooper closed his eyes and leaned into her touch. Later that evening, I walked the dogs by the river. The sun was setting, casting everything in gold. Daisy chased dragonflies. Bruno trotted beside me. Cooper sniffed the breeze. I stopped at a bench and sat down. The dogs settled around me. An older man walking by paused. "They look happy," he said. "They are," I replied. "You must be doing something right." I thought about that. Maybe I was. Maybe not everything. But enough. At home that night, I took a photo of the 3 of them sleeping in a tangled pile and sent it to the rescue coordinator who'd first handed me Bruno's leash. "This all started with you," I wrote. Her reply came quickly. "No, it started with you saying yes." That stuck with me. Sometimes all it takes is a yes. One small moment of courage, one leap of faith. Bruno said yes to Daisy. Daisy said yes to everything. And Cooper, well, he took longer. But when he did, he said it quietly and completely. And now I was learning to say yes too. To change. To people. To dogs who show up in the snow and look at you like they've been waiting their whole life to be found. Daisy found the bird. She didn't hurt it, didn't even touch it, just barked like it had stolen her favorite toy and wouldn't give it back. The noise brought me out of the garage, where I was sorting through a stack of old tools I hadn't used in years. I followed the racket into the backyard and spotted her crouched near the base of the fence, tail straight out like a pointer, nose low to the ground. At first I thought it was just another squirrel, but when I stepped closer, I saw it. A young robin, feathers puffed and wings trembling. It wasn't quite a baby, not fully grown either. It looked dazed, probably fell from a low branch. The poor thing blinked slowly at me, too weak to hop away. Daisy was beside herself. She whined, barked once, then lay down beside the bird, paws outstretched, as if offering comfort. I crouched down, Bruno and Cooper coming up behind me. Bruno gave the robin a cautious sniff, then backed off. Cooper sat a few feet away, watching quietly. I lifted the bird carefully with both hands and carried it to the patio. Daisy followed, her nose practically glued to my elbow. Back inside, I grabbed a shoebox, lined it with a towel, and set the bird gently inside. It didn't protest. Just breathed slowly, eyes half-lidded. I called the local wildlife rehab center. "Bring it in," the woman on the line said. "We'll take a look." So I did. Daisy insisted on riding shotgun. She whined the whole way, her gaze locked on the box in my lap. When we arrived, the staff met me at the door. They took the bird inside, asked a few questions, then promised to call with updates. Back at home, Daisy paced the living room. She pawed at the door. She whined. Then she finally settled by the front window, watching the driveway like she expected me to go back out and retrieve the bird right away. Bruno curled up beside her. Cooper brought over one of his stuffed toys and dropped it at her paws. It was a quiet act, one of understanding. I watched from the kitchen and felt something shift again. They were more than a pack now. They were a family. The rehab center called the next morning. "Good news," the voice on the line said. "He's going to be fine. Mild concussion, no broken wings. We'll keep him for a few days." I glanced over at Daisy, who was now dozing beside the window. When I hung up, she perked up, then looked past me toward the door. "He's okay," I told her. She trotted over and licked my knee. The days stretched longer with the arrival of spring. Trees bloomed, bees buzzed in the flower beds, and the air turned soft and warm in the evenings. We fell into a rhythm again. Mornings at the park, midday training, afternoon naps, evening walks. I got into the habit of sitting outside with them after dinner. Daisy would chase moths. Bruno would sprawl under the porch light. Cooper would sit near the edge of the yard, facing the street, ears twitching with every passing car. One night, as the sun dipped behind the trees, a woman stopped in front of the fence. She was tall, maybe late 30s, with short hair and tired eyes. She looked like she'd been crying, but not just from today, like she'd been holding on to sadness for a long time. "That your Rottweiler?" she asked. I nodded. "Bruno. He's calm. He's had practice." She hesitated, then said, "I just lost mine, last week. Had him for 11 years. I'm sorry. He looked a lot like yours. Different ears, same eyes." Bruno walked to the fence, tail wagging gently. She reached through the slats and touched his head. "I haven't pet a dog since," she said. Bruno sat. The woman smiled for the first time. We didn't exchange names. She just thanked me and kept walking. I watched her disappear down the sidewalk, hands in her pockets. I looked at Bruno, who returned to his spot by the porch without fanfare. That's what he did. Offered quiet comfort. No pressure, no expectations. The next afternoon, I got a call from Christine. "I've got a situation," she said. "A teenage girl. New foster home. Really shut down. Won't talk to anyone." Her social worker reached out. She asked about therapy dogs. Thinks it might help. "Where?" "Just outside of town. About a 30-minute drive. They're open to a visit. Thought of you first." "We'll go." The foster home was a modest ranch-style house with a small front lawn and a faded porch swing. The foster parents, a kind couple in their 50s, greeted us kindly but kept their distance. "She's in the back room," the woman said. "Just so you know, she hasn't spoken much in weeks. Don't expect too much." I brought Bruno and Cooper inside, leaving Daisy in the car. This wasn't her kind of visit. Too much energy, too much movement. We entered the room slowly. The girl sat on the bed, knees drawn up, hoodie pulled tight. She didn't look at us. I didn't speak. Just sat in the corner and let the dogs do the work. Bruno approached first. Quiet. Slow. He didn't touch her. Just lay down beside the bed, close enough to be felt, not close enough to startle. Cooper lingered near the door, unsure. The girl didn't react. Not for a while. Then she shifted. Her foot moved, brushing Bruno's back. He didn't flinch. 10 minutes passed. Then she leaned over and placed her hand on his fur. Not a word. But something moved. When we left, the foster mom walked me to the door. "That's the most she's reached out in weeks," she said. "Sometimes it starts small." "Will you come back?" "Absolutely." Back at home, I told Daisy she'd get her turn next time. She licked my chin and knocked over her water bowl for emphasis. Later that week, the Wildlife Rehab Center called again. "He's ready to be released. We usually handle it ourselves, but your name came up in the notes. Said you might want to be there." So, on a clear Thursday morning, I drove back to the center with all 3 dogs in the back seat. We met in a field behind the building where volunteers had set up a small enclosure. The robin fluttered inside a transport cage, his feathers fully grown now, eyes alert. The staff opened the door gently. The bird hesitated, then took off. An awkward launch, a few flaps, then flight. He didn't go far, landed on a branch nearby. Looked back. Daisy barked once, a joyful little yap. Then the robin flew again, higher this time, out of sight. I looked down at Daisy. Her eyes were locked on the sky. "You did good," I said. That evening, I found myself back in the garage, staring at the stack of unused tools again. I'd been meaning to donate most of them, clear out the clutter. Instead, I pulled out an old wooden frame I'd been saving. I sanded it down, stained it, then picked out a photo to place inside. One of Bruno, Cooper, and Daisy on the porch, all looking in different directions like they were posing for 3 separate portraits. I hung it by the front door. Something about seeing them there every time I stepped inside made the house feel fuller. A few days later, I took the dogs to the park for our usual morning walk. As we neared the far end of the trail, a small group of kids sat on benches with a woman I didn't recognize. She waved us over. "Are those the therapy dogs from the school article?" "That's us." She explained they were part of a homeschool group doing a unit on kindness. They'd read about Bruno. They'd drawn pictures. One boy held up a crayon sketch of a black and brown dog with a tiny puppy on his back. "That's Daisy," he said proudly. "And Bruno is carrying her, because she's tired." Another girl asked if Cooper was a puppy too. "No," I said. "He's just quiet, but brave." We sat with them for a while. The dogs worked their usual magic. By the time we left, everyone had taken a turn petting Cooper, even the shyest kid. Later, I sent a note to the homeschool coordinator offering future visits. That night, I stood in the backyard as the sun dipped low. Bruno stood beside me, head high. Daisy chewed on a stick. Cooper lay in the grass, eyes closed. The breeze smelled like new leaves and cut grass. I thought about all the people we'd met, all the places we'd been, how each visit seemed small in the moment, but built into something greater. Maybe that was the lesson. Not to aim for big gestures, just to keep showing up. One paw print at a time. The first heat wave of the season came out of nowhere. One day the dogs were chasing squirrels through spring grass. The next we were all sprawled on the living room floor with fans blasting and bowls of ice water scattered like tiny oases. Daisy, of course, loved it. She sprawled belly up in the kitchen, her tongue hanging out like a pink flag, completely unbothered. Cooper wasn't thrilled, but made do, taking shelter in the shade or beneath the old coffee table where the tile stayed cool. Bruno, on the other hand, hated it. He was miserable. Even with the air conditioning on full blast and cool packs under his bed, he couldn't settle. He paced. He whined. He looked at me like I was personally responsible for bringing the sun too close to the earth. So I adjusted. Early morning walks before the heat hit, cold carrots from the fridge as treats. Damp towels draped across his back, and when even that didn't help, I filled a kiddie pool in the backyard. It took one glance from Daisy to decide it was hers. She dove in with a splash, then immediately tried to drink all the water. Cooper pawed at the edge, unsure. Bruno stood on the patio, unimpressed. I coaxed. I encouraged. Finally, I stepped in barefoot and splashed some water his way. He backed up, shook his head, and gave me the same look I imagine he'd give a cat trying to climb a ladder. But later that afternoon, I caught him dipping one paw in, then two. By the end of the week, he was standing in it fully, letting Daisy nibble at his ears as he stared off into the sky like a statue of pure patience. We made it through the heat wave, but it reminded me of something Christine had once said. Every season changes the rhythm, and the rhythm tells you what they need. With the rising temperatures came a summer schedule. Fewer therapy visits indoors, more outdoor community events, local fairs, pet expos, park meetups. I started getting invitations from groups I hadn't even heard of. Autism support networks, grief counseling centers, even a youth program focused on anger management. Each time I said yes, I made sure it was right for the dogs. Not every setting worked for all of them. Daisy loved fairs. She'd walk from booth to booth like she owned the place, accepting pets and sneaking bites of dropped funnel cake. Cooper did better in quieter settings, one-on-one or small groups. Bruno? He could go anywhere. A calming presence in a whirlwind of chaos. One weekend, we attended a city-sponsored Pets in the Park event. Booths lined the walkways. Kids ran wild. Dogs barked from every direction. I brought all three, with cooling vests and water bottles in tow. About halfway through the day, a boy approached our table. Maybe 10 years old. He wore headphones and held a small notepad in both hands. His eyes stayed low, his steps deliberate. He stopped in front of Cooper. I watched closely. Cooper didn't move. He stood still, tail low, head tilted. The boy slowly held out the notepad. Written on it were the words, "Can I pet him?" I knelt beside Cooper. "You sure can?" The boy reached forward, trembling slightly, and touched Cooper's head. A small smile crept across his face. He looked up, then sat down cross-legged beside him. They stayed like that for a long time. His mother came by a few minutes later, tears in her eyes. She mouthed, "Thank you." It was moments like that reminded me why we kept saying yes. Why the heat, the long hours, the early mornings, all of it was worth it. Christine reached out again in early July, this time with a different kind of opportunity. "We're piloting a summer youth program," she said. "Teens at risk, some with behavioral issues, some with home troubles. We're pairing them with therapy-trained dogs to teach responsibility, empathy, self-awareness. You interested?" Always? The program was held on a private farm about 20 minutes outside the city. A mix of open fields, shaded trails, and a barn converted into a classroom. I brought Bruno and Cooper the first week. Daisy would have overwhelmed the place. There were 8 teens in total. Some wore tough expressions like armor. Others didn't speak at all. The lead facilitator, a calm man named Dave, gave me a rundown before we started. "They've been through a lot. Don't take anything personally, and don't expect fast progress." Bruno broke the ice almost immediately. One of the boys, tall and lanky, leaned down to tie his shoe and found Bruno pressing his snout against his elbow. He laughed. Cooper kept his distance at first. Then one of the girls, a quiet kid named Tasha, sat down on the barn steps and waited. Eventually, Cooper approached. Not all the way, just enough to close the gap she wasn't ready to bridge herself. That week was full of trial and error. Some kids connected easily. Others pushed boundaries. But the dogs remained steady. On the 3rd day, I overheard Tasha talking to Cooper. Just a whisper. "You're scared too, huh? That's okay. We can be scared together." By the end of the week, every teen had a journal filled with notes about their assigned dog. Likes, dislikes, routines. Some even wrote short stories. One boy wrote, "Bruno listens better than most people. When I talk, he doesn't look away. He just stays. That's enough." When the program coordinator asked if we could return for the next cycle, I didn't hesitate. At home, the dogs settled into their usual routine. Daisy remained the chaos engine, waking us all up at 6:30 by launching herself onto the bed like a furry meteor. Cooper was quieter these days, but also more playful. He'd begun initiating games, stealing socks and darting away with a flash of tail. Bruno had started doing something new too. At night, when the others had gone to bed, he would sit beside me in the living room while I read. He didn't ask for anything, just sat, breathing evenly, a quiet companion in the low light. I got a call one evening from the director of the local children's hospital. "We'd like to invite you to our therapy visitor program. Weekday afternoons, short visits. The children are long-term patients. Some can't leave their rooms." I thought about it. It was heavy, emotional, different from anything we'd done before. "We'll try," I said. The first visit was sobering. A room filled with sterile smells, quiet murmurs, blinking machines. Bruno adjusted immediately. Cooper was more hesitant, but steady. We met a girl named Lily, 10 years old, battling leukemia. She had no hair, but a dazzling smile. She was sitting up in bed, coloring with one hand, an IV in the other. "Is that your dog?" she asked. "He's mine," I said, "but he'd like to be your friend too." Bruno patted over and placed his chin gently on her blanket. Lily giggled. "He's heavy, but I like him." She talked non-stop for the next 20 minutes. About cartoons, about her brothers, about how she wanted to get a dog when she got better. As we left, she called out, "Tell Bruno he's my favorite dog ever." "I think he heard you," I said. Back in the car, Bruno rested his head on the console. Cooper sat beside him, both silent. I reached over and rubbed Bruno's ears. "You're doing good work, buddy. We made the hospital a regular stop. Twice a month. Short visits. Always voluntary. Some days were harder than others. Some rooms left me quiet for the rest of the night. But the dogs, especially Bruno, never wavered. At home, I began keeping a journal again. Not for myself, but for them. I started writing down moments, snippets. The way Daisy nosed Cooper awake when he snored. The way Bruno would lean against me during storms. The way Cooper had started jumping into the car without prompting. I didn't want to forget. One evening, while looking for an old leash, I found a box in the closet. Inside were things I hadn't touched in years. Photo albums, my wife's favorite scarf, a few letters we'd exchanged back when we still wrote letters. I sat down and leafed through them slowly. Grief isn't loud, not always. Sometimes it's just the ache that shows up when you smell a perfume, hear a song, or find a piece of handwriting that used to belong to someone you still talk to in your dreams. I placed the box back on the shelf and walked into the living room. All 3 dogs looked up. I sat on the floor, pulled them close. "Thank you," I whispered. Daisy licked my cheek. Cooper laid his head on my leg. Bruno just looked at me, calm and steady, and I realized the rhythm Christine had talked about. It wasn't just for them. It was for me, too. And it kept changing, just like the seasons. But every change brought something new, something worth holding on to. And the rhythm, somehow, kept leading us forward. It started with Bruno refusing to go up the stairs. I noticed it one evening after dinner. Daisy and Cooper bounded ahead like always, eager for bedtime. I called for Bruno to follow, but he stopped at the base of the staircase, looking up like it was a mountain he wasn't ready to climb. I walked back down. "Come on, big guy." He wagged his tail once, a soft thump against the hardwood, but didn't move. I tried again. Nothing. Instead, he turned and padded to his bed in the living room, circled twice, and lay down with a long exhale. The next morning, I called the vet. We'd been lucky. Bruno had aged well. But he was nearly 8 now, and after years of carrying weight and trauma in equal measure, maybe his joints were finally asking for a break. They ran the usual tests, checked his gait. X-rays showed early signs of arthritis. Manageable, but something to keep an eye on. I adjusted his diet, started him on supplements, bought a soft ramp for the porch and moved a dog bed into the bedroom so he didn't have to climb stairs anymore. He never complained, never whimpered, but I saw it in the way he moved. Slower, stiffer, as if his body was trying to keep pace with a heart that had never stopped giving. The community work continued. Bruno still visited the children's hospital, but now only once a week. Cooper took on more roles. Daisy never slowed down. But even she started checking in with Bruno more, resting her chin on his back during naps, curling beside him instead of on top of him. I kept our walks short. Bruno still insisted on going, even if just to the end of the block and back. I let him set the pace. One evening, after a visit to the farm sanctuary, we sat together on the porch, watching the sky streak pink and orange. Bruno rested beside me, Daisy snoring at our feet. Cooper stretched out nearby with his nose on his paws. "You've done more than most ever will," I said quietly. "You changed everything." He blinked slowly, eyes soft. That week, I received an invitation from the rescue where I first met him. They were hosting a 10-year anniversary event, celebrating milestones, honoring adopters. They wanted to feature Bruno. He's the one that started it all, the coordinator wrote. He gave so many others a chance just by existing. I accepted. The event was held in a park under a white tent with strings of lights and rows of folding chairs. There were tables with framed photos of adopted dogs, banners that read 10 Years of Hope, and volunteers wearing shirts with paw prints and hearts. Bruno wore his best bandana. Cooper wore his usual calm. Daisy wore a tutu someone handed her and pranced like royalty. I stood in front of a small crowd and told them what Bruno meant to me, what he had taught me, how he changed the air in my home, how he took a man drowning in silence and gave him something to anchor to. I talked about the first moment I met Daisy, the first bark from Cooper, the long nights, the laughter, the days at the hospital, the farm, the library, the schools. I said, Bruno taught me that second chances don't just change dogs, they change people. When I stepped down, people clapped. Bruno stood beside me the whole time, unmoving but alert, like he understood every word. After the event, we took a slow walk through the field. I let him wander. He sniffed the grass, watched butterflies, and paused under a tree, staring off into the open sky. I sat beside him in the grass, the others joining us. "You've had a good run," I whispered. "You made it count." Over the next month, he slowed even more. His legs trembled sometimes. He began sleeping through meals. He needed help up from his bed. I carried him more, lifted him gently, spoke to him often. Then one morning, he didn't get up. I sat with him for a long time. He wasn't in pain, just tired. So very tired. I called the vet, asked them to come to the house. Before they arrived, I brought Bruno out onto the porch. Daisy lay beside him, confused. Cooper rested his head on Bruno's paw. I wrapped him in his favorite blanket, held his head in my lap, told him he was a good boy, the best. And when the time came, he slipped away quietly, the way he had lived, with dignity, with grace. We buried him under the tree in the backyard, the one he used to nap beneath in the early days. I planted daisies nearby. Cooper sat by the mound for hours that first night. Daisy didn't understand. She searched the house for days, whined at the door, sat by the porch with her ears forward like she was waiting for him to return. So I took them out. More than usual. To the park, to the field, to the places Bruno loved. We walked, we sat, we remembered. I framed a photo of him and placed it by the door. For a while, the silence felt heavier again, but not empty, just quieter, softer. Then, weeks later, we got a knock at the door. A boy stood there, maybe 12, holding a folded flyer. His hand trembled. "Is this the house with the dogs? The therapy dogs?" "It is." They said one helped my friend when he was sick, and I thought, maybe I could meet one too, just for a little, if that's okay. I looked at Cooper, who was already walking forward. Daisy barked once, tail wagging. I stepped aside and opened the door wider. "Come on in. They've been waiting for you." And just like that, the rhythm continued. Different, but familiar. One paw print after another, moving forward through the quiet, through the seasons, into whatever came next. Bruno was gone. But the story he started was still being written. And it was far from over.